Reformation from 1517, correct me if I'm wrong, when Martin Luther nailed the thesis, at Wittenberg, right? 1517. Now, from that until 1690, actually, when Cork was taken by the Williamite forces, and they shelled it from, because that's one of the disadvantages of it. It's in a river valley, it's beautiful, but it's very vulnerable to attacking armies, because they just get up on the top and, just send mortars down there. So it was a walled city up until then, and the walls useless. So during the old Norman times, so that was kind of like a changing moment in the history of Cork. This same thing, of course, as you know, happened in Limerick, but Limerick was flat, and it withstood the siege. But Cork had no chance at all because it was down in the top. But anyway, between that period, the churches changed hands on an almost weekly basis, from Catholic to Protestant to Catholic, depending on how the ebb and flow of the battles were going. So Shandon was Protestant for quite a while, and would go back to Catholic, and so it suffered greatly from the European religious wars. Well, the British religious wars, but it was in a European context. So I've read quite a bit about the Reformation, or the religious wars in Cork. And now a lot of it would have gone over the heads of the ordinary people who lived in the lanes. The poor people lived down in the lanes.
The north side.
Yeah, if you read Angela's Ashes, it wouldn't have been much different. The lanes in Cork wouldn't have been much different than the lanes in Limerick. Extremely poor, except that in Cork they had very good. In the early part of the 1900s, they had very good Catholic Lord Mayors and Catholic government, and they actually cleared out the slums before Dublin or Limerick. They actually did go into a big slum clearance thing. If you read Strumpet City and some of the great books of early literature in Dublin that was written about Dublin of the early 1900s, Dublin was an incredible slum. It was like Naples of the 30s. I mean, it really was bad. It was still an English city even after the rebellion, but Cork became an Irish city earlier, and it also attracted the hatred of the English during the War of Independence, even more than Dublin. The Black and Tans burned it to the ground in 1920, and I mean, it was a dreadful. It was a barbaric act. And they burned the whole centre, and there was beautiful stores, including Roche's stores and all great names, and including, by the way, the Carnegie Library, which was a great loss. It had one of the best libraries, and you know how Carnegie had built all these wonderful libraries around the world. The Black and Tans were British terrorist soldiers, is what we call them. They burned.
They're Black and Tans because they didn't have.
Yeah.
They were regulars in the Second World War.
They were actual prisoners. They were actually thrown. Yes, yeah. Well, England had literally nothing left in 1919 after the end of after the armistice. I mean, it was gone. I mean, in the sense that its manhood, it just did not have any soldiers, so it cleared the prisons and sent them over to Ireland to put down the rebellion. Yeah, and they were incredibly brutal people. Yeah. So they were the Black and Tans. No, they were named, it wasn't the khaki uniforms, that's kind of later on, which was mitigated. They were named after a famous, in those days, coursing was a big sport, and bloodhounds was a very big part of Irish life. And the keeping a pack of hounds required a lot of skill and a lot of money and so on. And the champion pack of hounds at the time was a pack called the Black and Tans, and everybody in Ireland knew the Black and Tans, just like you'd know about the Chargers today. Yeah. Yeah. So they were named after those. But of course, later on, somebody says, "Well, that's not very politically correct. We're trying to be nice to the English now, so we'll say it has to do with their hairdos or something." You know. So it was that's classic revisionism, classic historical revisionism that sticks. No, they were named after the famous coursing pack of hounds called Black and Tans that ripped that poor animal to shreds. You know. Anyway, that was one of the defining moments in Cork history when they burned the centre of it. The other thing that makes it, they never even did that in Dublin or anywhere. That had nothing quite like that had ever happened since Cromwell in 1647. But the other thing was they went in and murdered Mayor Thomas McCurtain in his bed in his house. I mean, the mayor of the city. Like that was you know an act again of just sheer brutality to tell the Cork people, you know, we mean business. We're not going to let you go. So that was during the War of Independence, and then his successor, Terence McSweeney, was arrested, and I guess Terence probably knew that his fate was sealed as well, but he was imprisoned in England, but he went straight onto a hunger strike. Although technically they never really convicted him of anything, but they brought him over, put him in jail. They're supposed to have convicted him in magistrate's court to a 2-year term prison sentence, but anyway, he was in Pentonville jail, and he went on hunger strike and died. So he was the first really big, high-profile hunger striker, and that was a big event in Irish life, not just in Cork.
72 days, I think.
Is that what it was? Yeah. But it sort of tells you a lot about Cork, that it suffered three of the most memorable events in that time.
And then Tom Ash, like right around there too, right?
Yeah.
Thomas Ash.
Thomas Asher, you're right, but he was from Cork, but he mostly associated with the Dublin area though. He fought in North Dublin, actually. He was in charge of the North Dublin Brigade. But Tom Barry, they never really gave up, and they of course were a huge problem for the Free State when they signed the treaty. Cork was not going to go for it.
And Sean Moylan and all those guys kept fighting.
They sure did. Yeah. Dan Breen and all those guys. So they had to stomp out the final embers of it down there. And of course it cost, what was his name again? She's not here. Chet Lexi worships Michael Collins. Michael Collins, of course, lost his life in his own county. They have this sing-song accent, you know. Yeah, and a buy, you know, come here, I want to buy.
That was a good enough trade for Cahill Brewer, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Fair trade.
For Cahill Brewer?
Yeah, that's a fair trade.
Yeah. Well, Brewer was an Englishman.
Well, he still was hardcore Republican.
Oh, no, he was, but he was actually an Englishman. He was a candle.
He went out like a warrior too, you know.
He did.
That's how I went.
He went out like Bonnie and Clyde. He came out firing and was both good to no choice to kill the guy.
Butch Cassidy.
Huh?
Butch Cassidy.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, he was. He was exactly like Butch Cassidy. Yeah. They have that on film. Not him actually getting shot, but some of the final shots being fired from the window, as they had him hold up in, I've forgotten the building in Dublin, but he comes firing out.
That's called Brewer Street right there now, right where he got killed.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Forgotten what the building was, but yeah, he was.
Trinity College?
Huh?
No, it's like more like by Talbot Street, kind of like just north of Talbot Street, a little bit.
Yeah.
Where Sean Tracy was shot and killed, Talbot Street.
We got a real expert on all the blood that period here. He knows it all very well, which is great. But anyway, jumping all the way back again to our Finbar and early Christianity. I mean, that was in the 5th. We're not sure exactly whether 5th or 6th century, but it would have been right after Patrick, right at the very, very beginning, and that's why it can claim to be one of the oldest cities in Europe, and they love to say that it's older than Berlin, for instance. Then it had a great period during the early Gaelic Christian period. It was obviously a place where they came and went all the time, because they were very connected to France, and for some reason Bordeaux. There's again, the archaeologists have fantastic, make great strides in the artifacts and the stuff that they dig up, because they can tell where predominance of artifacts come from, and therefore the trade was who they were trading with. And the two cities that they traded with that dominated all others were Bristol and Bordeaux. And as you know, they brought in a great deal of wine for the aristocracy. The old Gaelic chieftains loved European wine. That was their big thing, and apparently they had lots of it. So we came across that somewhere early on in the class, where somebody says, "Where'd they get all this wine?" Well, it was a very big thing, importing wine into Ireland. So therefore, Bordeaux would have been an obvious